In this section of the course, we'll be covering the incident response process. The incident response process is a critical component of cybersecurity that outlines a systematic approach that an organization should take to manage and mitigate security incidents effectively. These incidents can range from cybersecurity attacks and data breaches to system vulnerabilities and unauthorized access. The primary goal of an incident response is to minimize the impact of security breaches, reduce the time it takes to identify and contain threats, and facilitate a swift recovery to normal operations. This process typically involves several key steps, including incident detection and classification, containment and eradication of the threat, evidence preservation, communication and reporting, and lessons learned for future preventions. A well-defined incident response plan is essential for organizations to maintain resilience in the face of evolving cyber threats and to safeguard their digital assets and reputation. So, in this section of the course, we'll be solely focused on Domain 4, more specifically Objective 4.8. Objective 4.8 states that you must be able to explain appropriate incident response activities. First, we'll provide an overview of the incident response process itself, including preparation, detection analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. Next, we'll take a look at threat hunting. Now, threat hunting is a proactive cybersecurity approach involving the continuous search and identification of hidden or emerging threats within an organization's network and systems. Then, we'll discuss the concept of a root cause analysis. Now, a root cause analysis is a systematic process used to investigate incidents and identify the underlying factors or events that led to a security breach or operational issue. After that, we will look at incident response training and testing. Incident response training and testing involves preparing personnel and systems to effectively respond to security incidents through tabletop exercises, simulations, drills, and live exercises. Next, we'll explore some digital forensic procedures. These digital forensic procedures refer to the systematic techniques and methodologies used to gather, analyze, and preserve digital evidence for investigations into cybercrimes or security incidents. Then, we'll review data collection procedures that you can use during an incident response. Data collection procedures are established methods for gathering relevant information and evidence during an incident response for forensic investigation, as well as covering a concept known as order of volatility. After that, we will look at how disk imaging and analysis is performed during an incident response. Disk imaging and analysis involves creating a bit-by-bit copy or image of a storage device or disk, and then examining the contents to recover data, investigate incidents, or identify security issues. And finally, we'll take a short quiz to see what you learned during this section of the course and review each of those quiz questions to fully ensure that you can explain why each answer was right. So let's prepare for the inevitable by learning about the incident response process in this section of the course. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the incident response process and its different phases. First, let's define what an incident is. An incident is an act of violating an explicit or implied security policy. There are lots of different things that could be categorized as an incident. For instance, if I stole your password and tried logging into the computer as you, that would be classified as an incident because it goes against the organization's security policy that state an employee should only log into their account using their own account credentials. Similarly, if an attacker wanted to install malware on the system, that would also be considered an incident because it breaks the security policies inside of your organization. There are lots of different things that could be categorized as an incident, but in this lesson, we're going to be focused on what steps or phases will be conducted in response to any generic incident that should occur. There are different ways to define the phases of an incident response, but one of the most commonly used is produced by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. In the NIST Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, special publication number 800-61, NIST defines a four-phase incident response process, which includes preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery, and post-incident activity. Often though, when conducting an incident response, you will start an incident, move through preparation, then go into detection and analysis, then when you find something more suspicious, you might move into containment, eradication, and recovery. Just when you think you have gotten everything handled, you find something else suspicious and have to move backwards to detection and analysis again. And so you can see that this isn't always strictly a linear process, but instead you will often loop around in the four phases. Inside each of these four phases, there are different actions that we're going to take, and these are all based on different procedures. When we talk about incident response procedures, these are procedures and guidelines that are covering the appropriate priorities, actions, and responsibilities that should occur in the event of a security incident. As I said earlier, there are many different incident response processes used in the cybersecurity industry, and the NIST guideline is by far the most common one. But for the exam, CompTIA actually breaks down detection and analysis into two different phases, and the containment, eradication, and recovery phase from NIST into three separate phases, creating a 7-phase model. During the exam, if you get asked about the phases of the incident response, you should use the 7-phase model covered in this lesson. The 7 phases of the CompTIA incident response cycle are preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident activity or lesson learned. Let's go ahead and look at these 7 phases in a little bit more detail. First, we have preparation. Preparation is a phase where cybersecurity practitioners try to make the system resilient to attack by hardening their systems and networks. This is also the phase where policies and procedures are written, and your communication plan is created to set up encrypted out-of-band communication paths. The preparation phase is focused on doing everything needed to get ready for some kind of future incident to occur. During the preparation phase, you will also conduct training, testing, and exercising of your staff with simulated incidents, as well as the creation of incident response kits. Second, we have detection. The detection phase is really focused on determining whether a security incident has occurred. Your organization's cybersecurity and triage analysts play a crucial role in categorizing and assessing the potential incident severity. Once an incident is categorized and triaged, we can then move into our third phase. Third, we have analysis. Analysis occurs when an incident is thoroughly examined and evaluated. Analysts work diligently to understand the scope and impact of the incident and to provide valuable insights into the nature and potential consequences. Subsequently, relevant stakeholders are notified, containment phases is initiated, and the implementation of the necessary initial response action is completed. Fourth, we have containment. Containment is used to limit the scope and magnitude of the incident by securing data and minimizing the impact on business operations and your organization's customer and business partners. For example, if a piece of malware was detected on a given system in the detection and analysis phase, Our goal in containment is to prevent that piece of malware from spreading to other systems on our network. In this case, we might disconnect the infected client from the network and lock out the user from using the workstation until we can clean the affected system. Fifth, we have eradication. Eradication begins once the incident is contained and is focused on removing the malicious activity from a given system or network. For example, using the previous malware example, if we have stopped it from spreading by disconnecting the client from the network, we can now remove the malware from that system or reinstall a known good image to the client to eradicate that malware fully from the system. Sixth, we have recovery. Recovery is focused on restoring the affected system and services to their normal secured state. Recovery often involves restoring a system from a known good backup, installing security patches, or implementing configuration updates to ensure that any vulnerabilities exploited during the incident have been fully and appropriately remediated. Additionally, your organization's recovery procedures may include monitoring systems for any signs of lingering threats to ensure a smooth return to normal operations. The ultimate goal is to minimize the impact of the incident and ensure the organization can resume its regular activities with increased resilience against future threats. Seventh, we have post-incident activity or lessons learned. Post-incident activity occurs after the system has been contained and malicious activity was eradicated and the system is fully recovered and restored to operations. At this point, we will spend some time analyzing the incident and the response to identify whether the procedures and systems that we had worked properly or is there anything else we can do better next time. During the post-incident activity, there are three major actions that occur: the root cause analysis, the lessons learned process, and the after-action report. The root cause analysis is a systematic approach to identify the initial source of the incident and how to prevent it from occurring again. This analysis usually occurs using a four-step process. 1. Define/scope the incident. 2. Determine the causal relationship that led to the incident. 3. Identify an effective solution. And 4. Implement and track the solutions to ensure that the incident is fully resolved. So let's consider an example of a malware infection in your organization. First, you would want to determine the initial cause of the incident. Maybe it was caused by malware being introduced to your network by a user plugging in a thumb drive to the workstation. Whatever the initial vector was, you want to find it and prevent it from occurring again. So how can we prevent this from occurring again? First, we might ensure all of our workstations have the latest version of our vendor's antivirus signatures on them. Next, we might also want to prevent data transfer from the USB devices like thumb drives for all the users. And third, maybe this particular piece of malware was found to only affect the Windows machines that are missing a certain software patch. Armed with this information, we can develop a plan to correct the incident, update all of the antivirus signatures, reconfigure the workstations to prevent USB devices, and install the Windows patch across our network. Our IT management team can track the implementation of these solutions as we fully recover from this incident. Next, we have the lessons learned process. This process is a formalized method to document the things we've experienced during the incident. What went right, what went wrong, and what could we do better next time? All of these things should be recorded, and our internal organization processes should be improved so that the same issue does not occur again in our next incident. For example, maybe the change management board was too slow to approve the security fix we needed to implement to fully secure the network. One lesson learned that might be captured is the need to decrease the approve times for emergent change requests during an incident. We don't have to redevelop and change processes during the lessons learned. We just need to identify what can be improved. Finally, we have the after-action report. This is a formalized report that collects information about what happened. In this report, you should have the root cause analysis and the recommendations for improvements from your lessons learned. Depending on your organization, the report may be very detailed and technical, or it may be written instead as an executive summary. Incident response and recovery is a truly important function in our organizations because it seems every day there's another story of a major data breach in the news. Try as we might, we can never make our networks 100% secure, and that means eventually we will likely have to perform an incident response and recovery. How you handle the situation during that critical time will determine how bad the incident will truly become for your organization. In order to conduct a proper incident response, your organization should utilize a team of professionals. But what does this incident response team look like? Well, the core team is made up of cybersecurity professionals with incident response experience, and they're supplemented by temporary members that are brought in for a specific incident. For example, if a database is involved, you may wish to deputize a database administrator to be part of the team during this response. Large organizations often have dedicated incident response teams where the members perform this role fully, but smaller organizations will instead create temporary teams that are brought in and brought together for a specific incident. These roles on the team become a sort of additional duty for an IT administrator or other employees in addition to their normal job functions. The team is made up of a leader who is a skilled incident responder, subject matter experts, IT support staff, legal counsel, and human resources and public relations. Your organizational leadership and management teams are responsible for ensuring the team has funding, resources, and expertise needed to conduct the incident response. Management is also required to make the critical business decisions during the incident response and communicating those decisions to key stakeholders or the media as appropriate. The other method that some organizations have taken to handle incident response is to outsource the incident response teams. While this can be effective, since these teams specialize in doing nothing but incident response all day long, this can be a very expensive method to utilize. The other challenge with outsourcing your incident response is that these outside organizations are not familiar with your enterprise networks, so they will have to spend some time learning your network before they can conduct their response efforts. From my experience, when it comes to incident responses, they are not something that you should be looking forward to. They are stressful and they include days without sleep and the constant threat that the threat actors are still one step ahead of you. So remember, our job during the incident response is to contain the issue, mitigate the threats, and get the organization back into solid footing as quickly as possible. This includes detecting the incident, responding to the threat, collecting evidence, containing the issue, restoring the network to full functionality, and further securing it to prevent reinfection. In this lesson, we're going to discuss threat hunting. So what is threat hunting? Well, threat hunting is a cybersecurity technique that is designed to detect the presence of threats that have not been discovered by normal security monitoring. Essentially, threat hunting is the act of being proactive in your defense as opposed to being reactive like you are with incident response. When you conduct threat hunting, you are looking for threats within your network instead of waiting for them to exploit or attack you. Threat hunting is focused on analyzing data within the systems that we own and operate on a daily basis. To do threat hunting, we first need to establish a hypothesis by performing threat modeling and determining what potential events have the highest likelihood and highest impact if they were to occur. To determine this, we will first ask the question, who might want to harm us? Who might want to break into our networks? And how might they be able to do that? We combine our threat modeling with threat intelligence to create a solid hypothesis about what type of campaign or what type of threat actor might want to do us harm and attack our networks. Then, we move into profiling threat actors and activities by creating scenarios that show how a prospective attacker might attempt an intrusion and what their objectives might be. Here, we want to answer some basic questions like what TTPs might they use, who wants to harm us, and are they an insider threat, a hacktivist, a criminal organization, or a nation-state APT? Based on the answers to those questions, we will determine what their objectives might be and what systems they might be trying to get. At this point, we can now start our threat hunting on the network. Remember, threat hunting is going to rely on the use of tools developed for regular security monitoring and incident response. So we're going to analyze the logs, look at information about our processes, our file systems, and our registry, including what has recently changed on our different hosts and servers. This information is usually going to be consolidated inside of a scene for us, and our threat hunters will spend a lot of time in the security information and event management systems to correlate the data and analyze it. So you might ask, what is different about threat hunting as opposed to the normal monitoring that your network and security operations centers are already performing? Well, the biggest difference is that with threat hunting, we begin with the assumption that our existing rules have failed to create an alert for something that may be malicious or suspicious. Your normal sensors do a great job of detecting well-known TTPs that already have signatures created and applied to our defensive systems, but threat hunting is looking for new things that may not already have signatures created for them. So when we are doing threat hunting, we are looking for those things that aren't being detected, things that have bypassed the rules, things where the query just isn't returning the data that we expected. This is really the central premise that we are using when we're conducting threat hunting. Remember, our existing TTPs and indicators of compromise in our defensive systems are known because someone identified the bad folk doing bad things. But the threat actors also know when their TTPs are becoming well-known, and therefore they will modify their tactics to try and avoid detection. Our goal as threat hunters is to try and detect them anyway, which is why we use threat hunting to find new tactics, techniques, and procedures for threat actors and create new indicators of compromise. Because of this, threat hunting is challenging and quite difficult to perform, but it's well worth it. To perform threat hunting, your analysts need to keep themselves up to date on the latest attacks and threats. To do this, they will need to use advisories and bulletins, intelligence fusion, and threat data. Advisories and bulletins are published by vendors and security researchers when new TTPs and vulnerabilities are discovered. When these new TTPs or vulnerabilities are first discovered, there may not be any signatures available in your protection suites, so it is important to conduct threat hunting to determine if your network is at risk based on these bulletins and advisories. Threat hunters also use intelligence fusion and threat data in their work. Intelligence fusion and threat data involves using a SIEM and threat analysis platforms to efficiently identify items of concern within your SIEM's logs and the threats other security researchers are observing in the real world. These real-world threats are usually available as TTP or IOC threat data feeds that can be combined with your SIEM to identify suspicious activity in your own networks. Now, let's take a quick example of how threat hunting works. Pretend for a moment that we just received threat intelligence that told us that the Windows desktops in a lot of different companies have been infected with a new type of malware out there in the wild. Currently, there are not any malware definitions available for this new threat. Based on the details that we find in the advisory or bulletin, we can begin threat hunting in our own network. For example, we might start by analyzing network traffic to determine if there's any outgoing traffic to some sort of suspicious domain or C2 server based on our threat research and looking at good reputational databases. Based on what we observe, we may create a list of different hosts that need to be investigated further because they are sending out network traffic to this suspicious domain. Then, when we look at those hosts, we might analyze the executable process list on those hosts, seeing what programs and services are being ran and which ones are opening that network connection. Then, we need to ask ourselves, are these valid connections or was this something suspicious that needed to be investigated further? If it is suspicious, we will move on to analyzing other infected hosts. As we look at these different infected hosts, we can start to see if there's any similarities between them. Are they all running the same malicious processes? Are they all using different processes as a method to avoid detection? Finally, we can start identifying the method that the malicious processes on those different hosts actually executed. What allowed it to start? Is there a way that we can block the attack vector against future compromises? Maybe we can move to application whitelisting or allow listing type of system, or maybe we can just utilize a blacklist or deny list for the vulnerable application until the patch has been developed by the vendor. This is the idea of threat hunting, where we take a needle in a haystack based on the information that we have and try to find the attackers. If they made it through our automated defenses by using additional tactical level resources, we need to identify those so that we can build new signatures and add them to our IPS to block future attempts. Threat hunting does consume a lot of resources and a lot of time to conduct, but it provides us with a lot of benefits. For instance, threat hunting can improve your detection capabilities because a threat hunter finds out how these attackers have gotten in and bypassed their detection suite. Then now you can rewrite the rule set and detection algorithms to detect things more accurately and prevent future exploitation. So remember, threat hunting is often integrated into your threat intelligence so that we can correlate external threat intelligence feeds with what you're seeing in your internal logs and other sources. By putting those things together, you now have actionable intelligence. In this lesson, we're going to discuss root cause analysis. Now, a root cause analysis is a systematic process to identify the initial source of the incident and to prevent it from occurring again. This analysis is usually going to occur using a four-step process. First, we define the scope of the incident. Second, we determine the causal relationships that led to that incident. Third, we identify an effective solution. And fourth, we implement and track the solution to ensure that the incident is fully resolved. So let's go through a quick example. Let's say you had a malware infection inside your organization. First, you need to determine the initial cause and scope of that incident. Maybe it was caused because malware was introduced into your network because somebody plugged in a USB thumb drive into their workstation, or they clicked the link in a spear phishing campaign, or they visited a malicious website. Now, whatever the initial attack vector was, our goal is to identify that so we can prevent it from happening again. If somebody caused this incident to occur by plugging in a thumb drive that was infected with malware, there are a couple ways that we can prevent this. One way would be to ensure that all of our workstations have the latest version of antivirus installed on them. This way, anytime you insert a disk, a CD, or a DVD, download a file, or plug in a USB thumb drive, it's going to be scanned for viruses and other malware before allowing you to read from the device. Another thing you might do is to prevent the data transfer from USB devices like thumb drives and external hard drives for all users on your enterprise network in the future. This will be another great way to stop data from getting from this infected device onto your system. Now, in addition to that, we might also find out that this particular piece of malware was only infected against certain types of machines that were running a certain version of Windows or were missing some type of security patch. And in those cases, we would identify that weakness and then we would create a solution to identify those things, such as upgrading the version of Windows or installing the security patches as that will protect us from this vulnerability. So now that we've gathered this information, we have to find and scope our incident. We should know how many machines have been affected and how many users have been affected by this incident and what operational impacts that has. Then we go and we determine the causal relationships that led to that incident. In this case, somebody installed malware using a USB thumb drive. So we need to identify an effective solution to stop that. And we came up with a handful here, just as we were going through this example. Things like adding antivirus or preventing data from being read from a USB mass storage device or installing a newer version of Windows or even an updated security patch for a particular vulnerability. And then this brings us to the fourth step, which is to implement and track the solutions to ensure that the incident is fully handled. Now, in this case, we might have a single system that was infected by a piece of malware on the USB device. So we've identified what it was, we determined the relationship that led to the incident, and we've identified a couple of effective solutions. In this case, I'm going to want to go ahead and ensure that I block mass storage devices from being read on the user system, and I want to ensure that their antivirus and anti-malware solution is up to date. And now I need to implement and track those action items. In this case, I would tell my system administrators through a change management process to install the registered change that will prevent USB devices from being read on that machine and make sure that it is part of our asset management and change management process to update the fact that that machine has been updated to the latest version of Windows and has the latest security patches. By doing all of these things, we have now contained this incident and figured out the root cause and stopped it from happening again. Now, I like to take this one step further. Because we have identified it on this single machine, we also may need to look across the network and see if there are other machines that could have been affected as well. For example, if we figure out the reason that this piece of malware was able to be installed is because you're running Windows 10 instead of Windows 11, then we might need to look at the rest of our network and say, how many Windows 10 machines do I have? If there are a lot of them, it may be a very large solution for us to try to upgrade all systems to Windows 11 and prevent this vulnerability from being exploited again. That's the real benefit of doing a root cause analysis. You need to figure out what caused the incident and then see how many other things across your network or across your organization are going to have the same feature set that could then be vulnerable to the same type of attacks so you can mitigate those vulnerabilities. Now, when you conduct a root cause analysis, you must make sure that this process uses a no-blame approach. In other words, the root cause analysis process is not designed to point fingers or assign blame to an individual or team. Instead, our primary goal is to identify the root cause of the incident and develop effective preventative measures to prevent the incident from occurring again in the future. Using a no-blame approach can encourage open and honest reporting, which is crucial for improving cybersecurity practices within an organization. Consider the real-world example of the two plane crash involving a Boeing 737 MAX that occurred back in October 2018 and March of 2019. After the crashes, the United States National Traffic Safety Board, known as the NTSB, joined the investigation to conduct a root cause analysis. During their investigation, the NTSB conducted an independent, no-blame root cause analysis with the primary objective of determining what went wrong and why. Their investigations are meticulous, thorough, and independent, and they often involve multiple experts across various fields. For instance, NTSB might look at an airline crash to see if it was caused by one or more factors, including pilot error, weather conditions, or technical malfunction. NTSB's investigators do not focus solely on blaming the pilot, but instead they analyze the entire chain of events, including weather data, aircraft maintenance records, communication transcripts, and cockpit voice recordings. Now, in the case of that Boeing 737 MAX crashes of 2018 and 2019, it was determined that both crashes were caused by issues in the aircraft's new flight control software that repeatedly pushed the jet's nose down due to a defective sensor on the aircraft. This essentially removed control from the pilots and caused both planes to crash into the ground since the pilot could not overcome the new yet defective maneuvering characteristic augmentation system used as the flight control system on these planes. So why does the NTSB use a no-blame approach when conducting their root cause analysis? Well, the NTSB is known for recognizing that human errors are often the result of systemic issues within the aviation industry, such as training procedures, equipment design, or regulatory oversight. By using a no-blame approach, the NTSB can identify these systemic weaknesses and recommend improvements to prevent similar incidents in the future. In the case of the Boeing 737 MAX, there were almost 400 planes in operation around the world, so the NTSB and other country regulators quickly grounded these planes until the root cause was identified and the defective flight control software was reviewed line by line to ensure that no other vulnerabilities could be identified that might cause future crashes to occur. So remember, when you conduct your root cause analysis, remember that our primary purpose is not to assign blame, but instead to figure out exactly what has occurred to cause the incident in the first place. By conducting a root cause analysis without blame, we can better identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses in our security practices and create more robust protections against cyber threats. Creating this no-blame culture can also encourage collaboration, transparency, and focus on solutions rather than assigning fault during or after an incident response. In this lesson, we'll discuss incident response training and testing. Now, when it comes to training and testing, many people think that they are the same thing, but in the world of incident response, they are different. First, we have training. Training is education to ensure employees and staff understand your processes, procedures, and priorities during an incident response. By conducting training, you're going to make sure that your people are ready to respond when something bad happens. Training should be provided to all employees with a relevant perspective and focus based on their needs because not everyone is going to get the same training. For example, if you're a first responder, you need training in a technical capacity. What are the procedures that you're going to follow? How are you going to re-image a machine? How do you remove malware? How do you change configuration settings? All of that stuff is part of your responding training. Now, if you're a manager or an executive, you're going to have different training requirements. You're going to be focused more on risk versus reward. You'll focus more on managerial decision-making and communication across your organization and outside the organization with law enforcement and media as well. Our end users also need to be trained though. Our end users should be trained on the way to report if they suspect an incident is occurring. For instance, as an end user, if I open up my email and I see a phishing campaign, how do I report that to the service desk? If I went and clicked on one of those links, I'm going to need remedial training to know how to identify that in the future and make sure that I don't fall for that again. This is the idea of your end user training. They need training on how to be a better user and how to prevent incidents from occurring in the first place. Now, when you're providing training, one of the things you want to make sure you're capturing is lessons learned from the previous incidents. And you want to make sure you bring those back up during the training. Because when you have lessons learned, that means that something went wrong in the past, and how can we do better in the future is by training those people on the lessons that we've learned. If we just write down those lessons learned and nobody reads them again, then nobody gets training on it, and then we're going to be doomed to repeat those things again. And so we want to ensure that we're preventing that. Remember, when you're doing training, it's not just about technical skills here. You also need to include soft skills and relationship building within your teams, because that's important as well if you really want a high-functioning cybersecurity incident response team. Now, let's take a look at testing. Testing is the practical exercise of incident response procedures. With training, we're going to teach you what to do. In testing, we're going to make sure you know how to do it. Now, when you're dealing with testing, we'll often conduct a test to simulate a significant incident. Now, the challenge is doing this is very costly and it can become a complexity. For example, I've been involved with a lot of testing over the years. One such task was a full-scale exercise that showed exactly what we would do in the event if we had a large-scale data breach. Now, this went across multiple sites around the world and it cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to do so. But it made sure everyone knew what they were doing and that they could actually go through those actions and get a bad actor out of our systems. Now, when you're designing your tests, you can do it in one of three major ways. The first is a tabletop, the second is a penetration test, and the third is a full-scale exercise of simulation. Now, when we're dealing with a tabletop exercise or a TTX, this is an exercise that uses an incident response scenario against a framework of controls or a red team. Now, the reason we call it a tabletop exercise is because we're actually doing it on our tabletop and we're not physically doing it in our networks. In a tabletop, we might gather experts around the table and we'll start presenting scenarios. For instance, if I was leading the tabletop, we would say, hey, you have an indication of data breach occurring in this database server. What would you do? And the defenders would start saying what they would do, and each would take turns almost like they're role-playing on what they would do in this particular scenario. Now, the benefit of doing a tabletop is that it's a lot less expensive than a full-blown exercise, but there are some negatives due to the fact that you can't really get the hands-on experience because you're not physically doing the things on the keyboard and making actions happen on the network. So it's really more of a theoretical exercise. Now, another way you can do this is you can break up people into red teams and blue teams. Now, the red teams are the attackers and the blue teams are the defenders. So you can actually take turns by saying, okay, here's the blue team scenario. This is what you detect. What do you do? And then based on what they say, the red team says, okay, then we would do X, Y, and Z. Then the blue team would say, well, we will see this and respond in A, B, and C way. And then they'll go back and forth several rounds to initiate attack and defendant gets that attack go back and forth until we can see what the effects are. The benefits of doing a red team versus blue team type scenario is that you're going to get live people thinking through both the attacker side and the defender side to help come up with a better solution and how to configure and better manage those controls to protect your network. Now, another way you can do this is by actually getting people on the network. This is done through a penetration test. Now, a penetration test occurs when a red team attempts to conduct an intrusion into the network by using a specific scenario based on threat modeling. Now, this is an important concept here when we're talking about penetration tests because we're not just doing something against the network to see what we can do to get in. We have a specific goal in mind. So if my goal is to go after the database, I'm not going to throw a distributed denial of service attack at you. That wouldn't be a valid pen test. So instead, we have a specific scenario based on the threat modeling, meaning we know what a regular adversary would do, and we're going to base our actions on that. Now, when you're dealing with a penetration test, you always have to agree on a clear methodology and rules of engagement before the penetration test is performed. This is critically important because there are rules to these things. As I said, I'm not just going to throw a distributed denial of service attack at you because that would probably be against the rules of engagement. Now, if they're in my rules of engagement, then it will be all fair game. But in most cases, that's not going to be in there. Some popular penetration testing tools and operating systems you might see in the real world are things like Metasploit, Cobalt Strike, Kali Linux, Parrot OS, and Commando OS. As a cybersecurity professional working as a network defender, if you ever see these tools or operating systems on your network, you should be thinking about the fact that they are penetration testing tools which could be used as part of a penetration test or even worse by an attacker because most of these are open source tools that anyone can download and use. The final area we need to discuss in terms of training and testing for incident response is the use of a simulation. A simulation exercise is designed to go beyond theoretical tabletop discussions and involve realistic, hands-on scenarios that mimic actual incidents. These exercises provide a comprehensive view of how well your incident response teams can execute their roles in a controlled yet authentic environment. Simulation exercises can range from relatively simple scenarios, such as responding to simulated phishing attacks or ransomware infection, to complex scenarios that involve multi-stage attacks, data breaches, and coordination with external parties like law enforcement or public relations teams. The goal of these simulations is to assess not only your technical skills, but also the ability to make sound decisions under pressure and effectively communicate within and outside the organization. When conducting simulations, it's essential to align them with your organization's threat landscape and risk profile. Simulations should challenge your incident response teams to think critically, adapt to evolving situations, and coordinate their efforts seamlessly. These exercises are invaluable for identifying gaps in your incident response plan, improving coordination between teams, and ensuring that everyone understands their roles during a real incident. By regularly incorporating simulation exercises into your incident response training and testing program, you can better prepare your organization to respond effectively to a wide range of cybersecurity incidents. So remember, training and testing are used to create a more robust incident response framework that can help your organization stay resilient in the face of evolving threats. Training is an educational process that equips employees and staff with the knowledge and skills needed to understand and respond effectively to incidents by focusing on processes, procedures, and priorities. Testing involves practical exercises that assess an individual or team's ability to execute incident response procedures to ensure that they can apply their training effectively in real-world scenarios. Simulation, on the other hand, refers to realistic, hands-on exercises that replicate actual incident response scenarios and provide comprehensive assessment of an incident response team's capabilities, decision-making skills, and communication under controlled conditions. In this lesson, we will cover digital forensic procedures. Digital forensics is a systematic process of investigating and analyzing digital devices and data to uncover evidence for legal purposes, often in the context of criminal investigations or legal disputes. Whenever you are performing digital forensics, you must always adhere to your organization's well-defined written procedures to ensure that you are properly handling your forensics correctly, efficiently, and in accordance with the required regulations. This approach helps to ensure that you are always utilizing consistent and established protocols. Digital forensic procedures are broken down and categorized into 4 main phases: identification, collection, analysis, and reporting. First, we have identification. The identification step focuses on ensuring the safety of the scene, securing it to prevent any evidence contamination, and determining the scope of the evidence to be collected. Let's pretend you're working with law enforcement as a digital forensic examiner or data collection expert. You receive a call to enter a home to respond to a crime, but you know that this house may be a potentially dangerous environment since the threat actor may still be inside the building. So now your initial priority is to first secure the scene to ensure your safety and the safety of others with the help of the police. And then, once the scene is properly secured, you can proceed to work to preserve the evidence from any kind of contamination. And then you can take videos or photographs of the crime scene to document where everything was when you arrived on the scene. At the same time, also need to begin to identify the scope of the evidence that you will need to collect by gaining a good understanding of where the relevant data might be stored, such as on a tablet, smartphone, smart TV, or server based on the nature of the data specified in the warrant. Second, we have the collection phase. Once we have identified what information needs to be collected, we can begin our collection phase. When it comes to collection, it is imperative that you have the proper authorization before you begin collecting any potential evidence. If you are working with law enforcement, this authorization will come in the form of a warrant signed by a judge. But if you're working in a large enterprise environment or conducting an internal investigation, you may need authorization from the CIO, CSO, CEO, or other high-level executive before attempting any evidence collection. When it comes to evidence collection, you need to ensure you follow the proper acquisition procedures for your organization, including following the order of volatility and preserving the chain of custody. Order of volatility is a systematic approach in digital forensics that dictates the sequence in which data sources should be collected and preserved based on their susceptibility to modification or loss. The general principles is to start with your collection efforts with the most volatile resources and work towards the least volatile resources in order to minimize data loss and maintain evidentiary integrity. Now, the typical order of volatility involves 5 main steps according to the NIST Special Publication 886. First, you must collect data from the system's memory, including the processor's cache and system's RAM. Second, we need to capture data from the system state, such as the system and network configurations, active user sessions, and any data that can be obtained without altering the state of the system. Third, we need to collect data from your storage devices, such as hard drives, solid-state devices, and other non-volatile data storages. Fourth, we need to capture network traffic and logs, including data that can help us reconstruct any network-related activities or network events. Fifth, we need to collect remotely stored archive data, including backups, cloud storage, external devices, and printouts. As you can see, our whole goal here is to collect the things that change fastest first, and then move into the more static or less frequently changed items like your offsite backups. When data is collected and acquired, you must ensure that the chain of custody is maintained. The chain of custody is a documented and verifiable record that tracks the handling, transfer, and preservation of digital evidence from the moment that is collected until it is presented in a court of law. Now, maintaining a secure and unbroken chain of custody is essential to demonstrate the integrity and admissibility of evidence. Anytime someone handles the evidence from their initial collector to a forensic analysis, investigator, or other legal professional, they must carefully document their actions and any changes in the evidence custody status. This meticulous record keeping ensures that the evidence remains untainted and can withstand scrutiny during legal proceedings that will ultimately contribute to a credible and robust case against the threat actor being charged with some type of cybercrime. When you collect your evidence, it should be collected using processes like disimaging and file carving. Disimaging involves creating a bit-by-bit or logical copy of a storage device, preserving its entire content, including deleted files and unallocated space. This imaging ensures that the original data remains untouched and allows forensic analysts to work with an exact duplicate of the device for their analysis. File carving, on the other hand, focuses on extracting files and data fragments from storage media without relying on the file system. File carving is particularly useful when file metadata is missing or corrupted. Both techniques can serve as a critical role in preserving evidence and providing forensic experts the data they need to conduct a thorough investigation while maintaining the original integrity of the evidence source. The third phase is the analysis phase. Once we have confirmed forensically sound copy of the evidence available, our forensic analysts can employ repeatable methods and tools for the examination of the evidence. This rigorous process involves systematically scrutinizing the data to uncover relevant information, such as potential signs of criminal activity, hidden files, timestamps, and user interactions. Analysts follow strict procedures and documented protocols to ensure consistency and objectivity in their findings. By adhering to these established practices, digital forensic experts can derive valuable insights from the evidence to help unravel complex cases and provide crucial support for any potential legal proceedings. The fourth and final step of the process is known as reporting. Now, after the forensic analyst completes their analysis of the evidence, they must present a document that describes their methods and tools that they use in their investigation, any actions that they perform through the analysis, their detailed findings, and their final conclusions about the investigation in their final report. This report serves as crucial evidence in legal proceedings and trials, and the forensic analyst must be prepared to testify in court about their findings. This is another reason why it's essential to adhere to strict procedures when conducting digital forensics, because you may be asked to defend your work against potential challenges by a defense attorney. Now, another important concept to understand is a legal hold. When litigation is reasonably expected, your organization will be forced to implement a legal hold. A legal hold is a formal notification that instructs employees to preserve all potentially relevant electronic data, documents, and records. Legal hold ensure that no evidence is tampered with, deleted, or lost, as any alteration or destruction of relevant data can lead to severe legal consequences. This process essentially freezes the state of electronic information to safeguard it for future use in an upcoming legal proceeding. When a legal hold is issued, you must ensure that preservation practices are used to protect the systems and potential evidence that they contain. Preservation involves taking proactive steps to maintain and protect electronic evidence in its original state, including ensuring that the data is not overwritten, deleted, or modified inadvertently. Preservation measures may include making backup copies of electronic records, isolating critical systems, and implementing access controls to prevent any unauthorized alterations. The goal of preservation is to maintain the evidentiary integrity of the electronic information, which is essential for building a strong case or responding to legal requests. Finally, we have e-discovery. E-discovery, or electronic discovery, is the process of identifying, collecting, and producing electronically stored information during potential legal proceedings. E-discovery encompasses searching through vast volumes of electronic data to locate relevant evidence, analyzing it, and presenting it in a format suitable for litigation. E-discovery tools and techniques are employed to efficiently sift through emails, documents, databases, and other digital records. Effective e-discovery practices are essential for legal teams to meet their disclosure obligations and navigate the complexities of modern litigation, where electronic data often plays a central role. Now, if all of this sounds like it has potential to have issues arise that could cause legal issues for you or your organization, you're right. In most cases, your organization should opt to appoint a liaison with legal knowledge and expertise to help facilitate communication and cooperation with law enforcement and forensic teams to ensure you stay on the right side of the law. This liaison can serve as a point of contact for interactions and ensuring a smoother process. And often, this person is someone who is a lawyer or works with your organization's in-house general counsel to keep your organization on the right side of the law. Finally, let's quickly talk about ethical considerations that are important to think about in the field of digital forensics. Your organization's forensic analyst must adhere to a code of ethics that emphasizes 3 key principles: avoiding bias, repeatable actions, and the preservation of evidence. All of your analysis must always be performed without any kind of bias or prejudice. Any conclusions you draw should be solely based on the evidence that you're analyzing. You should never have your own thoughts like, well, I don't like this person because of X, Y, and Z. Your investigation cannot be based on their color, their creed, their nationality, their sexual orientation, their political beliefs, what they look like, or anything else like that. It should be based only on the evidence. Personally, I have found that it's the best practice to use a forensic analyst who is completely removed from the situation to avoid any kind of potential bias. For example, in some places that I have worked, we would have one set of people who collect information called digital media collectors and another set that analyzes it called the digital forensic examiners. Under this model, the forensic analysts only have the data to rely on, since they don't know the victim or attacker's name or anything else about the case up to that point, and that can help minimize and eliminate some of that bias. Also, all of your analysis must utilize repeatable processes that anyone else can perform and get the exact same results that you did. This is why documenting all of your actions in a final report is so important, because proper documentation of methods ensures that others can reproduce the same results using the same techniques. Now, what I mean is that if I take the exact same evidence and give it to somebody else, they should be able to get the same results if they use the same methods that you did. For example, when I do my forensic analysis, I will write down the time, the actions that I took, and the results of those actions. For example, on February 2nd, 2024, at 10:23, I entered the command netstat-ANO at the command prompt of the Windows 10 system. I received a list of active network connections on that machine, and I noticed a connection to a potentially malicious server with an IP address of 66.55.44.33. In addition to this, I might also include a screenshot of the netstat results. This way, anyone who might be asked to double check my work can see what I did, when I did it, how I did it, and what results I received. It is almost critically important that any evidence you collect is not changed or manipulated. When I talk about evidence here, I am talking about both the device itself, like a hard disk of a laptop, and the files or data recovered from that device. For example, I am starting to perform a forensic analysis on your laptop. I should not start running commands on your laptop, since that could change the contents of your swap file and potentially other files of your hard drive. So I should first image that drive, then conduct my analysis on the disk image of that drive instead of the original drive to prevent any modifications or alterations of any potential evidence located on that hard drive. So remember, digital forensics is a systematic approach of investigating and analyzing digital devices and data to uncover evidence for legal purposes. Digital forensic procedures are broken down and categorized in 4 main phases: identification, collection, analysis, and reporting. You should always ensure that you follow a code of ethics that emphasizes 3 key principles: avoiding bias, repeatable actions, and the preservation of evidence. If you begin to have any deviations from these ethical standards and procedures, a good defense attorney will be able to discredit your findings in court, which could lead to the evidence you collected being inadmissible in court, and the threat actor will be able to get away with their crimes without any prosecution. So remember, always follow the proper procedures when collecting and analyzing evidence so that justice can be upheld even if your work undergoes rigorous scrutiny during a legal proceeding. In this lesson, we're going to discuss data collection procedures. During an incident response, we often need to collect evidence of the cyber attack for further analysis. For example, if your main server has been infected with some kind of malware as part of an attack, you want to get that cleared up and get the server back online as quickly as possible to minimize the disruption to your operations. But if you do that, you may erase the evidence of the attack that will make it impossible to figure out who did it. Now, to overcome this challenge, we often use digital forensic collection techniques to make forensic images of the data on the servers, and we use that as evidence for later analysis. Doing that allows your incident response team to help you get your server back online as quickly as possible and resume operations, but also maintain the evidence. Your incident response team may need that evidence because they may be working with law enforcement, and if you're doing that, you're probably going to seek criminal prosecution for the attacker who broke into your system. As part of your data collection and evidence collection efforts, you're going to do a lot of different things. For example, you're going to capture and hash the system images. This means you're going to use tools like FTK Imager to make an exact copy of the server's hard drive and then hash it to make sure it doesn't change while you're analyzing it. Then you're going to analyze the data you collected using software tools. You're going to use forensic tools like FTK, Forensic Toolkit, or EnCase. Then you're going to have to capture screenshots of the machine. What was the machine looking like when you arrived on the scene? You want to capture pictures of that so you know exactly what it looked like. You might also go back and look at your network traffic logs and captures and go and review all of that and see how they move throughout the network as you're trying to trace back the attack. And if you think someone was physically on your property, you may want to capture video from the closed circuit TV. Now, as you're collecting this data and evidence, you want to consider the order of volatility, which means which order things get modified quickest. The quickest thing that gets modified is the cache inside the processor, then the memory, then the swap files, then the hard drives, right? And you think about which one is going to get changed first. When you do that, you have to collect things based on that order as well. And anything on the victim machine can be modified if there's a threat actor on the machine, right? We also want to collect the evidence as quickly as possible. Then we want to take statements from witnesses and administrators. What did they see? What made them think that there was an incident? Maybe there was just someone who said, hey, the mouse from my computer all of a sudden started jumping all over the screen. That's something you need to collect the information from and figure out why did that happen. Then we want to review our licensing and documentation and figure out, do we have the proper license for all of our systems? And do we understand how they work? And are they working the way that they were designed based on the documentation? And then, of course, we're going to track our man hours and our expenses because at the end of the day, this is an incident response. Someone's going to say, how much did it cost us? And if you look at the most recent data breaches in the USA, large companies are suffering millions and millions of dollars of losses in the cost of these data breaches, both in the response efforts as well as the value of the data that was lost. Now that we have some basic understanding, let's talk about data acquisition. Data acquisition is a method and tools used to create a forensically sound copy of the data from a source device, such as system memory or hard disk. Now, when you deal with acquisition, the first question you have to ask, do I have the right to search or seize this thing legally? This is an important question because in your organization, not all devices are owned by the company. If it's owned by the company, yeah, you have the right to go ahead and collect it because you work for that company and they want you to do it. But what if you're allowed to bring your own device? If you're allowed to bring your own device into the organization, these policies can get very complicated very quickly because you might not be legally able to search or seize that device because you don't own it. The employee does. And so you have to make sure that the evidence you're gathering, you have permission to gather it. Otherwise, the search could be inadmissible. Another thing that makes data acquisition very complicated is that when you get to a crime scene, you're not just dealing with the physical world, you're dealing with the digital world. And so when I come into a room and I see the lights are on, the computer's on, how am I going to collect the data off of the computer? Am I going to shut it down? Am I going to power it off? Am I going to collect it when it's powered on? All of these are valid options and each one has its drawbacks and benefits depending on what you're trying to collect. But for now, I just want you to keep in mind the fact that you're dealing with a digital crime scene as opposed to just a physical one. There is some evidence that can be lost when you turn off a computer or shut it down. And so you need to make sure that you understand what you're going to do and the procedures that you're going to deal with. Now, this brings us to the idea that some of the data can only be collected when the system is on. Some of the data can only be collected once the system is shut down or you suddenly remove the power. Now, an analyst always has to think about the order of volatility when they collect their evidence. First, we always want to collect anything that is short-term, anything that is highly volatile. So if you start thinking about things like the CPU registers and the cache memory, that is a very small amount of memory inside that processor. So it's getting changed very frequently, so you want to collect that as soon as possible. Then we move on to other volatile memory, which are things like system memory, routing tables, ARP caches, process tables, temporary swap files, and things like that. All of those things are volatile and are changing quite rapidly, but not nearly as quickly as the CPU register or cache memory. Then we move on to data that's on persistent mass storage. Now, in the old days, we would just say hard drive, but nowadays we just say mass storage because this includes our hard drive, our solid state drives, and our flash drives. All of these are persistent mass storage devices because they will retain information when you take the power away, unlike memory. But it does still change quite often as long as the computer is on and people are writing or reading to that disk. Then we're going to go ahead and collect the things that are remotely logged, things like our scene and monitoring data. This is important because while it is not on the system that you're analyzing, it was already remotely logged somewhere else. That other place somewhere else is still being read and written to over and over again by other systems, and so it could modify some data, so we want to collect that as well. After that, we want to get anything that's physical. This is the physical configuration and network topology and things of that nature. So if I go into the network and I start looking at the way it's wired and just say, okay, this computer was talking to the switch, which talks to this router, and I can start mapping out and collecting that information. After that, we're going to collect archival media. Now, what is that? It's things like backup tapes and offsite storage, things that are written once and then aren't touched again. For instance, you might write something to a CDR or a DVR. Once it's written to that disk, it's going to maintain that data on it until you destroy the disk. So it is our lowest priority of collection, but still something we want to collect at the end of the day. Now, one piece of warning that I want to give you is something that a lot of junior analysts will neglect to think about. When you're dealing with the Windows registry, a lot of people think about the Windows registry as being on the hard disk. And while most of the Windows registry is stored on a hard disk, there are many key areas like the HKLM/hardware component that only stores themselves in memory. So you want to analyze that registry part using a memory dump instead. When I analyze the registry, I usually do it via memory dump first, and then I can go back and do it off the hard drive afterward. That way, anything that was missed in memory might get caught by the hard drive, and I can see both things. When you're dealing with things like the /hardware hive, it's really important to capture that because it's going to record every single disk that has been connected to or taken out of that computer. If I use a thumb drive on the computer, it's going to be logged in that hardware hive. So that would tell me as an analyst that I need to start looking for that thumb drive or that flash drive so I can find data that was written off of this computer. And so that's one of the reasons why it's really important to think about it. So remember, when it comes to data acquisition, we're talking about the method and tools used to create a forensically sound copy of the data from a source device such as a system memory or hard disk. When performing data acquisition, always follow your documented processes and procedures to ensure that you don't contaminate or lose any potential evidence of a cyber attack or the investigation that you're responding to.
In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a disk image from a USB thumb drive using DD in Linux, Unix, or Macintosh system. So the first thing you need to do is connect your USB thumbstick through a write blocker. Now, if you don't have a write blocker, for the purposes of this lab, you don't really need one because again, we're not doing a forensic image necessarily because we're not law enforcement. But if you are working in the field, you really do want to use a write blocker. So I'm going to plug it into my machine and I'm going to use fdisk-L to list the devices that I have. You can see I have an internal hard drive of 8 gigabytes in size. I have this virtual hard disk of 2.5 gigabytes in size. And then this is my 2 gigabyte thumbstick that I'm looking for. SDB. SDB is the device name. And it does have one partition on it that is 1.9 gigabytes in size, and it is a FAT32 for Windows type partition. So to create the disk image, what I'm going to do is do DD and then block size of 64 kilobytes. My input file is whatever that disk is. Now, this is where you have to decide what you want to copy. Do I want to copy the entire disk or just the one partition? Now, in my case, I do want the entire disk. And the reason why is because I want everything that is partitioned and everything that's not partitioned. So if I'm going through and I'm a legal investigator and I'm looking for hidden things, sometimes those exist outside the partition. So by doing the /SDB, I get the entire disk drive, all of the partitions, and any of the blank space. And then the output file, which in my case, I'm just going to call it USB 2GB.dd and hit enter, and it will start copying that drive. This will usually take about 30 seconds for every gigabyte you're going to copy, depending on your system speed. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to the end of this copy, and we'll pick it up from there. All right, we're back and the disk has finished copying. We can see that here in the directory, USB to gigabyte.dd is the file. So what I want to do at this point is create a hash because again, that chain of custody is very important. And the way to do that in Linux is just doing MD5 sum, which is an MD5 hash, and then the file name, in our case, USB to gigabyte.dd, and hit enter. It will calculate how that hash will be and output it there on the screen. At that point, I would enter that into my log and that becomes part of the chain of custody. I would also want to use a SHA-1 or a SHA-256 because MD5 is considered a little bit weak in this day and age. Now, first thing you're going to do is download and install the FTK Imager. Once you have that done, you'll go ahead and open it. You will have to give it administrative permission, as I did just there, and it will open up the program. Now, FTK Imager does allow you to do a bit of looking through the files, but in this case, we're going to first look at collecting the image for a forensic image. So you're going to go to File, and then go down to Create Disk Image. Then you'll select whether it's a physical drive, a logical drive, an image file, the contents of a folder, or multiple CDs and DVDs. In my case, it is a physical drive because it's a USB thumb drive, and I'll click Next. And then I'm going to select the drive, and in my case, it is physical drive 1. It is a Memorex 2 gigabyte USB thumbstick, and I'll hit Finish. At this point, it'll ask where do I want to save the file that I'm going to create. So I'm going to go ahead and do it as a raw DD image because any forensic tool can use that, whereas EO1 is reserved for ENCASE and AFF is reserved for FTK. Then select Next. You can give it the information you want. In my case, I'm just going to call this case 01. Evidence number, we'll call that 01. Unique description, USB 2 gigabyte drive. The examiner was my name, Jason Dion, and any notes you may have. Then click Next. Select where you want it to be stored. In my case, I'm just going to save it directly to my desktop so I can find it easily. And then what is the file name going to be called? I'm going to call it USB 2 gigabyte.dd for the DD image. And then I will hit Finish, and I will start. And when I'm done, it's going to verify images after they're created, which will create the hash for me. And we will go ahead and hit Start, and off it will go. Now this will take a couple of minutes because it is a 2 gigabyte thumbstick, and 2 gigabytes is quite a bit of data to be imaging. So it'll probably take us about 5 minutes. So I will speed up the video so you don't just hear watch it count for 5 minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about it. So as you can see, it took about 2 minutes for it to copy the 2 gigabyte drive, and now it's going through and doing a verification, which is creating the hash. This is going to take us maybe about 20 seconds. And as soon as it's done, we get our drive results. So let's scroll up here and we can look at this. So you'll have the name of the drive, which in my case is USB 2 gigabyte.dd.001, which is the first file. The sector count that's going to be involved, you'll see the hash, the reported hash, and the computed hash, and they both match. And they should, because that's what we just did. And then it'll also give you a SHA-1 computed hash and reported hash, and there were no bad blocks in the image. So we can go ahead and hit close, and then we can hit close again. Now, let me minimize this, and you'll be able to see the disk image. It is going to sit here inside the Jason Dion folder, which is my administrative account, and on the desktop. You'll see that there are a couple of files here. There is 001 and 002. Now, what is the difference? Well, if you'll notice, this is only a 1.5 gigabyte image. That's where the software by default is going to break these into chunks. So if you have a 1 terabyte hard drive, every 1.5 gigabytes or so, it's going to chunk that into a separate file. That's okay because it's going to be able to read that as I bring that back into the software. And then you'll see this text file, which is just going to have the summary contents for us. So it tells us it was created by FTK. This is part of our chain of custody now. It's going to tell us what the drive looked like. It's going to tell us what the device looked like and its serial number. And it's going to give us the computed hashes and the reported hashes that we did, as well as our verified hashes. So this was a hash before we took the image, and this is the hash after we copied the image. Now, if you want to open this file, we're going to do that inside of FTK and we can analyze it. So we'll do file, we'll add evidence item. It's going to be an image file this time because we just created the image. And then we're going to find it. And it is sitting inside my JSON Dion folder on the desktop. And you'll open up the first one, 001, and it will open 001 and 002 for me. The drive shows up here in the evidence tree. Now, as you open it, you'll see the partitioned and the unpartitioned space. So any files that may have been hidden would show up in this unallocated space. Now, if I open up the drive itself, it was FAT32, and I can look at the root of the drive, and you will see the different types of files on it. Notice the ones with the X's here, this .mp3. This is a deleted file, but I can see it because of this forensic techniques that we're using. And you can see all sorts of different music that I used to have on this thumb drive that have been deleted at some point, and some of these files can be restored using this forensic software. The other thing we're going to be looking for here is we can scroll down and see anything that's deleted. You can see all of those files, and you'll be able to see the ones that are not deleted. So let's look at the date modified. What was the most recently touched things on the system? Well, this deleted folder was. So maybe the bad guy was trying to hide something from us. And so I can actually go in and restore that and look at that. Then you can see these other files that are sitting here. Again, these are in the Slack space because they were deleted a long time ago. Now, this again is not a forensics course where I'm going to teach you everything how to do this. I just want to show you some of the capabilities that you can go back and pull some of this information. So if we open this, we can see inside this folder, there was all of these different slides. And so maybe if I open this slide, oh, look, we can find this deleted folder and see what it looked like. It looked like an in brief for some sort of operation. Now, what is this really? Well, this was something I did for my church. We did a spy night for the kids, and these are some old files from that spy night folder that we used. But that's the idea here, is that you can go back and restore some of these things and be able to see what the bad guy was trying to hide as you go through and do the analysis. That's the benefit of this. And we're doing this off the disk image, not the drive we originally collected, because that USB drive is not even plugged into the computer anymore because we don't need it.